Today's story is Don't Get In. Waitress pulled Mafia Boss back seconds before his car exploded. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before today's story begins, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support gives us the opportunity to keep creating meaningful and emotional stories for you. We are truly grateful that you chose to spend your time here today. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's begin today's story. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one the world refuses to notice. Don't get in. The scream sliced through the humid Chicago evening just as Malcolm Hayes reached for the handle of his armored Cadillac. A pair of trembling hands grabbed the sleeve of his tailored black jacket with surprising force. For a split second, time itself seemed to hesitate. Malcolm turned sharply, his dark eyes narrowing as they met those of a young waitress in a plain burgundy uniform. Her breathing was frantic. Her natural curls had come loose from their bun, and terror, not panic, but absolute certainty, filled her wide brown eyes. "Please," she cried again, "don't get in that car." Before Malcolm could utter a single word, a deafening explosion shattered the night. The Cadillac erupted into a roaring ball of orange fire. The blast threw shattered glass across the valet entrance, sending luxury sedans screeching to a halt. Flames climbed toward the marble columns outside Bella Rosa, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, while terrified guests dove behind parked vehicles. The shockwave slammed into Malcolm's body, forcing him backward. The waitress instinctively wrapped both arms around him as they crashed onto the polished pavement together. For several endless seconds, neither of them moved. The world became nothing but ringing ears, flying embers, and the bitter smell of burning gasoline. Bodyguards flooded the entrance almost instantly. Weapons were drawn. Protect the boss. Secure the perimeter. Find the shooter. Within moments, half a dozen rifles surrounded the young waitress. She slowly lifted her shaking hands away from Malcolm's coat. I didn't do this," she whispered. One guard yanked her to her feet before she could finish speaking. "On your knees." She obeyed without resistance. Her name was Aaliyah Brooks. Until 30 seconds ago, she had been invisible. Just another hard-working black waitress balancing heavy trays, smiling politely at wealthy strangers who rarely remembered her face. Now every weapon in the courtyard pointed directly at her. Malcolm remained unusually silent. Dust covered his expensive suit. A thin cut along his forehead allowed a line of blood to run toward his jaw, yet he barely noticed it. His gaze never left the young woman kneeling on the concrete. Not because he believed she was innocent, because one impossible question echoed louder than the explosion itself. How did she know? Aaliyah lowered her eyes, tears gathering despite every effort to remain composed. She already understood what everyone around her believed. A waitress had touched the most dangerous man in the city moments before an assassination attempt. To them, there could only be one explanation. She had to be involved. The lead bodyguard pressed the barrel of his pistol against her shoulder. "Talk." Her lips trembled. "I was only trying to save him." No one answered. The silence that followed felt colder than the smoke drifting through the ruined entrance. Across the street, emergency sirens began echoing between towering buildings. Restaurant guests whispered behind shattered windows. Some filmed with trembling phones. Others stared at Malcolm Hayes, expecting immediate revenge. Instead, the feared mafia boss took one slow step toward the frightened waitress. His expression revealed nothing. Only the quiet calculation of a man who had survived countless betrayals. And for the first time in many years, Malcolm Hayes found himself wondering whether fate had just sent him a warning, through the last person anyone would ever believe. The loud crackling of burning metal continued to echo through the valet entrance long after the flames had swallowed Malcolm Hayes' Cadillac. Firefighters had not yet arrived. The heat alone forced everyone several steps backward. Aaliyah Brooks remained on her knees, her wrists pinned behind her back by one of Malcolm's security men. She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She simply stared at the inferno with tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. "I told him," she whispered to herself. "I was just in time." The lead bodyguard, Isaiah Grant, crouched until his face was inches from hers. His expression was carved from pure suspicion. "You knew?" Aaliyah looked at him without defiance. "I knew something was wrong." "You knew enough to stop him." His hand slammed against the hood of a nearby SUV. How? The question echoed through the smoke. No answer came. Several black SUVs screeched into the restaurant driveway as additional members of Malcolm's organization arrived. Within moments, the entire block belonged to them. Traffic stopped. Pedestrians disappeared. Even the police cruisers that had begun approaching remained several hundred feet away, waiting for permission to enter. Malcolm Hayes slowly rose from the pavement. A medic stepped toward him with a first aid kit. He raised one hand. "I'm fine." Blood still trickled from the cut on his forehead, but his attention remained fixed on the young waitress. She couldn't have been older than 26. Her uniform was inexpensive. Her shoes were worn. One sleeve had been torn during the explosion. Nothing about her suggested she belonged anywhere near a carefully planned assassination. Yet she had grabbed him with absolute certainty. Not hesitation. Not luck. Certainty. Isaiah walked toward Malcolm. "Boss." "What?" "We found no shooter." Malcolm remained silent. No trigger device either. Silence again. But somebody had to plant the bomb. Another guard approached holding a scorched piece of twisted metal inside an evidence bag. C4. Malcolm recognized it immediately. Military grade. Professionally installed. Not something an ordinary criminal could buy. His jaw tightened. Someone had wanted to erase him completely. Isaiah glanced toward Aaliyah. "She's the only witness." "No," Malcolm corrected quietly. "She's more than a witness." Isaiah frowned. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. She knew. Across the courtyard, Aaliyah closed her eyes. She could hear every word, every sentence. Pushed another invisible weight onto her shoulders. She knew exactly how this looked. A poor black waitress, standing beside the most feared mafia boss in Chicago. Seconds later, his car exploded. No jury would believe coincidence. No investigator would believe instinct. No one would believe the truth. Isaiah signaled 2 guards. "Take her." Cold steel handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Restaurant employees gasped. One waitress covered her mouth. Another quietly began crying. The restaurant manager hurried outside. "Aaliyah?" His voice shook. "There has to be some mistake." Isaiah didn't even look at him. "Go back inside." "But she has worked here for 3 years." No response. "She never even argues with customers." "Nothing. She's one of the kindest employees I've ever." Inside. The manager obeyed immediately. Fear spread faster than the smoke. Aaliyah slowly stood as the guards pulled her toward a waiting SUV. She looked once toward Malcolm. Not pleading. Not begging. Simply searching his face for one impossible thing. Belief. Instead, she found only unreadable silence. Just before the rear door closed, Malcolm spoke for the first time since the explosion. "Wait." Every movement stopped. Even Isaiah turned. Malcolm walked toward the vehicle at an unhurried pace. His polished shoes crunched across shattered glass. When he reached Aaliyah, he studied her face for several long seconds. She couldn't hold his gaze. "I'm going to ask you one question," he said calmly. "If you lie," he glanced toward the burning wreckage, "you'll wish that explosion had killed you instead." Aaliyah swallowed hard. "I understand." Malcolm's voice remained almost gentle. "When you grabbed me, were you trying to save my life? Or save your own?" The courtyard became completely silent. Even the roaring flames seemed to fade beneath the weight of the question. Aaliyah slowly lifted her eyes. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "I only knew that if you opened that door, someone's father was about to die." For the first time that night, something almost invisible shifted behind Malcolm. Hayes' cold, unreadable eyes. 3 days earlier, long before the fire, long before the sirens, long before Malcolm Hayes ever learned her name, Aaliyah Brooks began her mornings at 4:45. The alarm on her aging phone buzzed only once before she silenced it, careful not to wake the woman sleeping in the next room. Her grandmother had once possessed the powerful voice of a church choir singer. Now illness had reduced every breath to a quiet struggle. Aaliyah paused beside her bedroom door every morning, listening for that familiar rhythm of slow breathing before allowing herself to move. Only then would she begin another day. Their apartment occupied the 3rd floor of an aging brick building on Chicago's South Side. The wallpaper had faded years ago. The kitchen faucet leaked. The heating system complained louder than the winter wind. Yet every corner of the tiny apartment remained spotless. Her grandmother often said dignity had nothing to do with money. You can be poor, she liked to tell Aaliyah. But never become careless. Those words stayed with her. Every morning, she prepared oatmeal, organized medication into small plastic containers, brewed fresh tea, and left handwritten notes beside the breakfast tray before quietly heading out. The first bus arrived before sunrise. Most passengers stared at their phones. Some slept against the windows. Aaliyah preferred watching the city wake up. Streetlights disappeared one by one. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Construction crews gathered around steaming cups. Chicago looked different before the noise began. Hope seemed easier to believe in before people remembered who they wanted to become. By 7 o'clock, she had already changed into her burgundy waitress uniform inside Bella Rosa restaurant. Luxury surrounded her every day. Crystal chandeliers, imported marble floors, vintage wine worth more than her annual salary. The wealthy rarely noticed the people carrying their meals. Aaliyah didn't resent that. She simply observed. She remembered regular customers by the way they folded napkins. She knew who tipped generously before the bill even arrived. She recognized lonely people because they smiled too. Quickly at strangers. Observation had quietly become part of who she was. Not because anyone taught her. Because life had. When money was scarce, details mattered. A strange sound from an old furnace. An unusual charge on a bank statement. A forgotten pill bottle. Small things often became large problems if ignored. Her coworkers laughed whenever she pointed out tiny details no one else noticed. "You'd make a great detective," one cook joked. She simply smiled. "I'm just paying attention." That afternoon, the restaurant manager called everyone together. His normally relaxed expression had vanished. "We have a very important private reservation tonight." The kitchen instantly fell silent. No mistakes. Everyone nodded. "The entire west dining room has been reserved." Someone whispered the name almost reverently. Malcolm Hayes. The room became noticeably quieter. Even employees who had never met him knew the stories. Power. Influence. Fear. Some called him a businessman. Others used darker words. No one spoke them too loudly. Aaliyah listened without joining the conversation. To her, Malcolm Hayes was simply another customer. Another human being. Nothing more. Nothing less. Late that evening, expensive black SUVs began arriving outside Bella Rosa one after another. Security personnel inspected every entrance. Guests glanced nervously through the windows. An atmosphere of invisible pressure settled over the restaurant. Aaliyah balanced a silver tray against one shoulder as she walked toward the private dining area. Before entering, she paused. Something felt different. Not dangerous. Just unusual. Near the valet entrance, a man wearing a maintenance vest was kneeling beside a luxury vehicle. His uniform appeared authentic. His toolbox looked ordinary. Yet one tiny detail caught her attention. The logo stitched onto the back of his jacket was upside down. Most people would never have noticed. Aaliyah did. She slowed her pace. The man quickly closed his toolbox. Without looking toward anyone, he walked away much faster than maintenance workers usually did. Another small detail. His toolbox made almost no sound. Too light. As he disappeared around the corner, Aaliyah's eyes drifted back toward the black Cadillac waiting beneath the entrance lights. For reasons she couldn't explain, an uneasy feeling settled deep inside her chest. She stood motionless for only 2 seconds. Then the restaurant manager called her name from behind. "Aaliyah, table 12 needs service." She blinked, forced herself to smile, and walked inside. But even as she greeted her next guests, her thoughts kept returning to the man with the silent toolbox and the upside-down logo that refused to leave her mind. Most people ignore the details that later become evidence. Aaliyah couldn't. The uneasy feeling followed her through the evening like a shadow that refused to disappear. She greeted guests with the same warm smile. She refilled crystal glasses. She carried expensive entrees from the kitchen with practiced precision. To everyone around her, she appeared completely composed. Inside, however, her mind kept replaying the same image. The upside-down company logo. The silent toolbox. The man who had walked away too quickly. Something about it refused to fit. Near 8 o'clock, Bella Rosa's private dining room came alive. Malcolm Hayes had arrived. His entrance was almost quiet. No loud announcement. No unnecessary display of power. Only disciplined men in tailored suits scanning every corner before allowing him inside. Conversations softened as he passed. Even wealthy executives instinctively lowered their voices. Power rarely needed an introduction. It simply changed the atmosphere. Aaliyah entered the private room carrying a bottle of sparkling water. She kept her eyes lowered, exactly as professional etiquette required. Still, years of careful observation worked without permission. She noticed Malcolm thanking the elderly chef, who personally welcomed him. She noticed him pulling out a chair for one of his older business associates. Not the behavior she expected from the terrifying stories whispered throughout Chicago. People were rarely only one thing. As she placed another glass on the table, two men entered several minutes late. Neither wore expensive watches. Neither looked comfortable inside a luxury restaurant. One carried a small, black backpack. The other kept checking his phone every few seconds. Aaliyah wasn't assigned to their table, but while passing nearby, she heard fragments of their conversation. Timing. After he leaves. Signal. The words alone meant nothing. Restaurants were full of unfinished conversations. She continued walking. Then one sentence stopped her. The driver's side. She slowed almost imperceptibly. Another voice answered. It'll be over before anyone realizes. The second man laughed quietly. No witnesses. A chill traveled through her spine. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood. Perhaps they were discussing a movie, a business deal, anything else. But when she glanced toward them, both men immediately fell silent. One casually zipped the black backpack closed. The other noticed her looking. For only a second. Yet his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. As though he suddenly realized someone had heard too much. Aaliyah quickly apologized. I'm sorry, gentlemen. I didn't mean to interrupt. She continued toward the kitchen without waiting for a reply. Behind the swinging doors, she leaned against the stainless steel counter, trying to steady her breathing. One of the cooks laughed while chopping vegetables. You look pale. I'm fine. You sure? She forced a smile. Just tired. But she wasn't tired. She was thinking. The maintenance worker. The unusual toolbox. The strange conversation. The words driver's side. Individually, none of them proved anything. Together, they formed a picture she desperately hoped was wrong. A few minutes later, she carried another tray toward the dining room. As she passed the front windows, something metallic caught her eye beneath Malcolm's Cadillac. It reflected the chandelier light for only an instant. Too small for most people to notice. Aaliyah stopped walking. One of the valets immediately approached. Everything okay? She pointed discreetly toward the vehicle. Did someone work on that car tonight? The young valet frowned. No. You sure? I've been here since 6. What about maintenance? He shook his head. We never call maintenance for customer vehicles. Aaliyah looked back. Toward the Cadillac. The tiny reflection was gone. Perhaps it had never been there. Perhaps the angle of the light had changed. Reason told her to return to work. Instinct refused. Her grandmother's voice echoed somewhere deep inside her memory. When too many little things stop making sense. Don't wait for a big thing to prove you were right. Aaliyah stood frozen beside the entrance, watching Malcolm Hayes laugh quietly with his guests through the restaurant window. If she said something and she was wrong, she would almost certainly lose her job. If she stayed silent. She looked once more toward the waiting Cadillac. For the first time that evening, fear gave way to something stronger. Responsibility. The hardest choices are often made in complete silence. Aaliyah stood near the restaurant entrance, gripping the edge of her serving tray so tightly that her knuckles turned pale beneath her dark skin. Inside, laughter drifted from the private dining room. Outside, Malcolm Hayes' Cadillac waited beneath the soft glow of the entrance lights. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. That was exactly what frightened her. She checked the time. Almost 9:30. The dinner would end soon. If she spoke now and she was wrong, her career would likely end before the night was over. If she stayed quiet and her instincts were right, someone would never go home again. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the emergency number, then stopped. What would she tell them? That a logo had been upside down? That a stranger's toolbox seemed too light? That she had overheard half a conversation? No dispatcher would send officers because of that. Not in a city like Chicago. She slipped the phone away. The front doors opened. Cold night air rolled into the lobby. Several members of Malcolm's security team stepped outside first, scanning rooftops, parked cars, and nearby intersections with practiced precision. Their movements were calm, professional, confident. Whatever danger Aaliyah believed she sensed, they clearly hadn't. Malcolm emerged a few moments later, speaking quietly with one of his associates. He looked almost relaxed. His jacket rested over one shoulder. One hand disappeared into his pocket as he thanked the restaurant manager for the evening. Nothing about the scene suggested that death was only seconds away. The valet jogged toward the Cadillac with the keys. Aaliyah's heartbeat accelerated. She searched the parking area one final time. Then she saw it. A man across the street, standing beside a newspaper box. His baseball cap sat unusually low over his face. In his right hand rested a small object no larger than a garage door remote. The man wasn't watching traffic. He wasn't looking at pedestrians. His eyes never left Malcolm Hayes. At that exact moment, Malcolm accepted the keys from the valet. He smiled politely, turned, and reached toward the driver's door. Time seemed to fracture. Every warning, every strange detail, every uneasy feeling, every whispered word, they all collided inside Aaliyah's mind at once. There was no more time to think, only time to choose. She dropped the silver serving tray. The crash echoed through the entrance hall. Heads turned. Before anyone understood what was happening, Aaliyah sprinted across the marble floor. One bodyguard instinctively reached for his weapon. Another shouted, "Stop!" She ignored them. She threw herself between Malcolm and the Cadillac. Her hands seized his jacket sleeve with every ounce of strength she possessed. "Don't get in." Malcolm barely had time to turn. "What?" She pulled him backward with desperate force. "Please." The man across the street lowered his thumb. A tiny red light blinked on the remote, and the night exploded. The blast erupted from beneath the driver's seat with terrifying force. Flames burst through the windows. Steel twisted like paper. The windshield disintegrated into thousands of glittering fragments that shot across the driveway. The shockwave hurled Malcolm and Aaliyah onto the stone pavement. Heat rolled over them like a living wall. Guests screamed. Car alarms began blaring throughout the block. Black smoke climbed into the night sky. For one endless heartbeat, nobody moved. Then training replaced shock. Weapons appeared. Security agents surrounded Malcolm. Others rushed toward the street. The man with the baseball cap was already gone, vanished into the chaos before anyone reached him. Isaiah grabbed Aaliyah by both arms and pulled her violently away from Malcolm. She offered no resistance. She couldn't. She was staring at the burning wreckage. The driver's door had been blown completely off. If Malcolm had opened it, there would have been nothing left to save. Isaiah shoved her against a black SUV. "Who sent you?" "I don't know." "Don't lie." "I swear." He tightened his grip. "Then tell me how you knew." Aaliyah looked past him at the burning Cadillac, her voice trembling with exhaustion rather than fear. "I didn't know." She swallowed. "I noticed." Those two quiet words disappeared beneath the wail of approaching sirens. But Malcolm Hayes heard every single one. Truth rarely arrives all at once. It begins with one small answer that refuses to disappear. Aaliyah sat alone inside a windowless interrogation room beneath one of Malcolm Hayes' private warehouses. The room contained nothing but a steel table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Her handcuffs had been removed. The fear had not. Nearly 2 hours had passed since the explosion. No one had offered her water. No one had accused her directly. They simply kept asking the same question in different ways. "Who recruited you?" "I don't know." "Who paid you?" "No one." "Who planted the bomb?" "I don't know." Each answer sounded exactly like the last. Each answer made her seem guiltier. Outside the room, Isaiah watched through a narrow pane of reinforced glass. "She's trained." Another guard nodded. "She never changes her story." Malcolm stood silently behind them. His forehead had already been stitched. Fresh clothes had replaced the bloodstained suit. Only his eyes revealed that the night had changed him. "Bring me everything," he said quietly. Everything. Everything about her. Within an hour, thick folders covered the conference table. Employment records, bank statements, medical bills, school transcripts, surveillance photographs. Isaiah flipped through the pages with growing confusion. No criminal record. Another. Guard frowned. No unusual financial deposits. A third added another document. Works double shifts every weekend. Malcolm opened one folder himself. Inside was a photocopy of Aaliyah's employee file. 3 years at Bellarosa. Perfect attendance. Several handwritten compliments from customers. One note caught his attention. She stayed 3 hours after closing to comfort an elderly customer who had collapsed after learning his wife had passed away. No manager instructed her to stay. She simply had. Malcolm turned another page. Monthly pharmacy receipts. Cancer medication. Recipient, Evelyn Brooks. Relationship, grandmother. He closed the folder slowly. Nothing fit. Professional assassins didn't spend nearly every paycheck caring for an elderly grandmother. Isaiah folded his arms. People fake backgrounds. They do. They build clean identities. They do. So she's still possible. Malcolm looked toward the interrogation room. Possible. But something continued bothering him. He replayed the explosion inside his mind. Not the fire. Not the blast. The moment before. When Aaliyah grabbed him. He had seen fear. Not calculation. Real fear. Fear for someone else's life. He walked into the interrogation room without another word. Aaliyah immediately stood. I'm sorry. The apology surprised him. For what? For touching you. The answer caught him completely off guard. I know I wasn't supposed to. You think that's what concerns me? Her eyes dropped again. I ruined your dinner. For the first time that night, Malcolm almost smiled. Almost. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. No lawyer. I don't have one. No requests. She shook her head. No. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly innocent. She said nothing. Malcolm placed a small object onto the steel table. A security photograph. The maintenance worker with the upside-down company logo. Aaliyah's eyes widened instantly. That's him. Malcolm noticed her reaction before she realized she had revealed it. You've seen him before. She nodded. Outside the restaurant. You recognized him immediately. Because of the jacket. What about it? The logo was upside down. Silence. Malcolm stared at the photograph. Even enlarged, the mistake was almost invisible. He had missed it. His entire security team had missed it. Only she had noticed. She continued quietly. Real maintenance workers carry heavy toolboxes. He carried his with one hand. And it never made any noise. Malcolm leaned back slowly. The room became completely still. She wasn't describing guesses. She was describing observations. Tiny ones. The kind almost everyone ignored. She looked at him carefully. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying not to ignore something that didn't make sense. Malcolm lowered his eyes to the photograph once more. Then another memory surfaced. The remote. The baseball cap. The perfect timing. Someone had planned every second of the attack. Professionals didn't leave obvious mistakes. Unless the upside-down logo had never been a mistake at all. It had been a distraction, which meant whoever organized the bombing had expected everyone to look outside, not inside. For the first time since surviving the explosion, Malcolm Hayes realized the enemy might already be standing much closer than anyone imagined. The most dangerous enemy is rarely the one holding the weapon. It is the one standing close enough to know where you will be. Malcolm Hayes walked alone through the upper level of the warehouse, his footsteps echoing across polished concrete. Below him, dozens of loyal men searched for the bomber across Chicago. Roadblocks had been established. Safe houses were being raided. Informants were disappearing into interrogation rooms. Yet Malcolm no longer believed the answer waited outside his organization. Someone had known exactly which car he would use. Exactly when dinner would end. Exactly where the bomb needed to be placed. That information existed inside a very small circle. Isaiah entered carrying a digital tablet. We've tracked every phone near the restaurant. Anything. Nothing unusual. Malcolm didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the security footage from Belarosa frame by frame. Guests arriving. Valets working. Servers moving between tables. Then he paused the recording. The maintenance worker. He rewound. Played it again. Paused once more. His eyes shifted away from the fake technician. Toward another figure. One of his own bodyguards. Standing nearby. Watching. Not the maintenance worker. Watching Malcolm's Cadillac. Malcolm enlarged the image. The guard was named Victor Sloan. Former military. 7 years in Malcolm's security division. Trusted enough to travel in the lead vehicle during high-risk operations. Victor appeared calm. Too calm. Where is Victor now? Malcolm asked. Isaiah checked his tablet. He reported home after the explosion. Reported? Yes. Did anyone verify? Isaiah's silence answered the question. Minutes later, Victor's apartment stood empty. Closets cleared. Hard drives missing. Cell phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator contained only bottled water and expired milk. He hadn't fled suddenly. He had prepared to disappear. Isaiah looked stunned. He planned this. Malcolm slowly nodded. Not alone. Back inside the warehouse, Another team arrived carrying evidence recovered from the destroyed Cadillac. A bomb technician placed several fragments onto the conference table. Military-grade explosive. Malcolm remained silent. The technician continued. The triggering system was sophisticated. He pointed toward a scorched circuit board. Someone needed direct access beneath the vehicle. Isaiah frowned. Impossible. Not impossible. The technician looked at him. The car sat unguarded for exactly 14 minutes before dinner. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. 14. According to surveillance timestamps. Isaiah immediately understood. The fake maintenance worker. The technician shook his head. No. Everyone looked at him. He didn't have enough time. Silence settled over the room. Installing this device required at least 40 minutes. The bomb expert tapped the damaged metal casing. This wasn't planted during dinner. It was installed much earlier. Malcolm felt the final pieces beginning to connect. The fake maintenance worker. The upside-down logo. The visible distraction. He had never been there to install the bomb. He had been there for one purpose only. To make sure every investigator looked at him. Not at the person who had already completed the real job hours before. Someone inside Malcolm's own security detail. Someone with unrestricted access to every vehicle. Someone everyone trusted. Isaiah spoke quietly. Victor. Malcolm nodded once. No. Isaiah looked confused. Victor helped. He wasn't the architect. The room fell silent again. Malcolm remembered something else. Victor had never decided Malcolm's schedule. He only followed it. Someone else knew every meeting, every route, every reservation. Someone with authority. Someone whose word no one questioned. Across the warehouse, a young analyst hurried toward them carrying another folder. We found this in Victor Sloan's encrypted files. Inside was a list. Dates, locations, travel plans. Every movement Malcolm had made during the previous 6 months. At the top of every page appeared the same initials. RC. Isaiah frowned. Who was RC? No one answered. Malcolm slowly closed the folder. Only one person in his entire organization used those initials. Richard Cole, his oldest advisor. The man who had helped build the empire beside him for nearly 20 years. The man Malcolm trusted enough to know every schedule before anyone else. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline. Inside the warehouse, nobody spoke. Because everyone understood the same terrifying truth. The conspiracy had never begun outside Malcolm Hayes' empire. It had been growing quietly at the heart of it. Justice does not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks quietly into the room and waits for the guilty to speak first. Richard Cole arrived at Malcolm Hayes' warehouse just after sunrise. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His tailored charcoal suit looked untouched by the chaos of the previous night. The explosion had dominated every news broadcast across Chicago. Yet Richard appeared strangely composed, almost relieved to find Malcolm alive. My God, he said, extending both hands. When I heard what happened, Malcolm accepted the handshake. Only briefly. I survived. Richard smiled. Thankfully. Around them, dozens of senior members of Malcolm's organization gathered inside the conference hall. No one knew why they had been summoned so early. They expected retaliation, a declaration of war. Instead, Malcolm calmly took his seat at the head of the long oak table. Isaiah closed the doors. Heavy locks clicked into place. The room became silent. Malcolm looked around slowly. For 20 years, he began, I've trusted the people in this room with my life. No one spoke. Last night, someone proved that trust was misplaced. Richard lowered his eyes respectfully. A terrible betrayal. Malcolm nodded once. Yes. He pressed a remote. Security footage appeared on the large screen. The fake maintenance worker. The restaurant entrance. Victor Sloan. Every movement unfolded without sound. Richard watched carefully, never once changing expression. Then Malcolm displayed another image. Victor's encrypted schedule. Every movement. Every reservation. Every destination. At the top of every page. RC. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Richard sighed softly. Someone is trying to frame me. Malcolm remained calm. Perhaps. Richard immediately stood. You know me. I helped build everything we have. I protected your father. I protected you. Several men around the table nodded. Richard had indeed been beside Malcolm for decades. His loyalty had never been questioned. Until now. Malcolm slowly placed one final object onto the table. A restaurant receipt. Ordinary. Wrinkled. Almost insignificant. Richard frowned. What is that? The answer. No one understood. Malcolm looked toward the conference room doors. Bring her in. Aaliyah entered quietly. She wore simple borrowed clothes instead of her waitress uniform. She looked uncomfortable standing among armed men whose combined reputations terrified an entire city. Richard barely acknowledged her. Malcolm spoke gently. Aaliyah, look carefully. She stepped closer to the projected security image. Her eyes moved across the frozen frame. Past Victor. Past the fake maintenance worker. Then she pointed toward someone almost hidden behind a marble column. There. Several guards leaned closer. A man carrying two identical folders. One black, one dark blue. Aaliyah spoke carefully. The blue folder. Richard looked confused. What about it? She answered without taking her eyes off the screen. Your assistant carried it into the restaurant. And when he left, he was carrying the black one. Silence. Malcolm pressed another button. Additional footage appeared. Different camera. Different angle. Exactly as she described. The folders had been exchanged. Richard's breathing slowed almost imperceptibly. Aaliyah continued. The maintenance worker distracted everyone. But your assistant met Victor inside. They switched the folders. The bomb plans were inside. No one had noticed. Not the guards. Not investigators. Only the waitress who remembered tiny details because that was how she survived every ordinary day of her life. Malcolm looked directly at Richard. You underestimated the wrong person. For the first time in decades, Richard Cole lost control of his expression. Only for a fraction of a second. Fear. Real fear. It was enough. Isaiah immediately raised his weapon. Other guards followed. Richard glanced around the room. There was nowhere left to run. He laughed quietly. One tired laugh. After all these years, I was undone by a waitress. Malcolm slowly stood. No. He looked toward Aaliyah. You were undone. By someone who paid attention when everyone else stopped looking. The room fell completely silent. Outside, morning sunlight broke through the warehouse windows. Inside, an empire watched the truth reveal itself without a single shot being fired. Power can buy silence. It cannot buy gratitude. 3 months later, autumn settled gently over Chicago. The leaves outside Bella Rosa restaurant had turned shades of amber and gold, scattering across the sidewalk each morning before the first customers arrived. Life had slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Waiters polished glasses. Chefs argued over recipes. Coffee steamed behind the counter. Only one thing had changed. Table 12 remained permanently empty. No reservation was ever accepted there again. It was where Malcolm Hayes' life had almost ended, and where another life had quietly changed forever. Richard Cole had disappeared into federal custody after agreeing to testify against several criminal networks in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victor Sloan was arrested 2 days later while attempting to cross the Canadian border. The bombing conspiracy had collapsed without another shot being fired. Many newspapers called Malcolm lucky. He never corrected them. Luck had nothing to do with it. One ordinary Thursday afternoon, Bella Rosa's employees gathered near the entrance after the manager announced an unexpected visitor. A line of black SUVs rolled silently to the curb. Several familiar security guards stepped out first. But unlike before, no one reached for a weapon. No one searched the building. The atmosphere felt different. Calmer. Malcolm Hayes entered wearing a simple dark overcoat instead of an expensive tailored suit. Without bodyguards surrounding him, he looked less like the man newspapers feared, more like a father returning home after a long journey. Every employee stood awkwardly. Every employee except Aaliyah. She continued arranging silverware exactly as she had every afternoon for years. When she finally looked up, she smiled politely. Welcome back. Not boss. Not Mr. Hayes. Simply, welcome back. Malcolm smiled. A real one. The first many of his men had ever seen. I came to thank someone. The restaurant manager quickly stepped aside. Malcolm walked toward Aaliyah and placed a small envelope on the table. She looked at it without touching it. What is it? A gift. She gently pushed it back. I can't accept money. It's not money. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside rested a property deed. Paid in full. A modest brick house on a quiet street less than 15 minutes from the hospital where her grandmother received treatment. A handwritten note rested beneath it. For Evelyn Brooks. A home where every window lets in morning light. Aaliyah stared silently at the paper. Her hands trembled. You investigated me. I did. You know why I work. I know. Tears gathered in her eyes. My grandmother always wanted a little garden. Malcolm nodded. The backyard has one. The restaurant became completely silent. No applause. No dramatic speeches. Only one young waitress struggling to find words. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Malcolm slowly shook his head. No. He looked around the room. Thank you. He wasn't speaking only to Aaliyah. He was speaking to every ordinary person who had ever believed that kindness went unnoticed. Before leaving, Malcolm paused beside the entrance. There is one more thing. He turned toward Aaliyah. My organization survives because people notice threats. You saved it because you noticed humanity. No one spoke. No one needed to. Some lessons were too heavy for words. Several weeks later, children laughed in the backyard of a small brick house while Evelyn Brooks planted roses beneath the afternoon sun. From the kitchen window, Aaliyah watched her grandmother smile more brightly than she had in years. Across town, Malcolm Hayes removed Table 12 from every reservation list in Bella Rosa forever. Whenever anyone asked why, he answered the same way. That table reminds me that the strongest person in the room isn't always the one with power. Sometimes, it's the one willing to stand between a stranger and death. Outside, another Chicago evening settled quietly over the city. Traffic continued. Restaurants filled. People hurried past one another without noticing the countless small details surrounding them. But somewhere among those ordinary moments lived a simple truth. Respect is never earned through fear. It is earned through humility. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like. Respect begins the moment we choose another person's life over our own fear.